Welcome to Bankole's Nation. I'm your host, Bankole Thompson. Thank you so much for joining us and for tuning in for this week's episode of our podcast. Coming up on this week, we're speaking with Robert Weiner, former White House spokesman, about the state of the 2024 presidential race and what he thinks Vice President and Democratic nominee Kamala Harris ought to do to close the deal with only 3 weeks to go before the election. Also, my interview with Chicago Congressman Jonathan Jackson from the state of Illinois. He has a special message as it relates to black men and the 2024 race. He believes that black men should be lifted up. Of course, my take on former President Donald Trump's visit to Detroit last week, where he insulted the city before the Detroit Economic Club. It's all coming up on this week's edition of Bankole's Nation. Stay with us. Let's bring in Bob Weiner, former White House spokesman in Washington. Bob, thank you so much for being here. And of course, a member of the National Press Club and recipient of the Press Club's President's Award. And Bob and I recently hosted a forum at the National Press Club with Senator Peters on the state of the 2024 Senate races around the nation. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, it's a pleasure, Bankole, to be on your second ever podcast, Bankole's Nation. And it's wonderful that you provide this to America and to Michigan. And thank you for all you've done. Fiery Conscience, featured in Forbes magazine, your book.
That's right.
There you go. The editor-in-chief of and founder of the Pulse Institute, one of the nation's great poverty institutes. Former editor of the Michigan Chronicle and the first editor to interview Barack Obama. First Black African-American editor. You've done so much with your career and you're so widely respected across the country that it really is truly an honor to be with you here today.
Thank you so much, Bob. And it's great to have you on. I want to begin, though. Let's look at the state of the 2024 presidential race. As we're speaking, Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee for president, is going to be in Michigan this week. I think, in fact, she's in Detroit today as we're speaking. Your take on the race so far, are you comfortable with where Democrats are?
I was very happy with her surge. You know, I was a big Biden friend. I was at his house when he first announced for Senate. And he remembered that when he talked to my wife one time when he came by at a portrait unveiling for the great John Conyers, who I had the privilege to work for 6.5 years. And Biden and Conyers was chair of Judiciary. Biden was chair of Judiciary in the Senate. So he came by and I said, as he walked by, I was at his house when he first ran for Senate. And he's looked at Pat and he said, that's exactly right. I mean, he remembers these things. That's the strength of Joe Biden. But we know that he depreciated some. We know that it was very real. It was not a fake thing at all that the Democrats had to deal with. And he's being a wonderful president and extremely effective at that. But they had to do something, and so they did. Harris's surge was fantastic in the beginning. It was amazing. She captured, I've never seen anything like it in my career. The entire Democratic establishment had everybody endorsing her, all the people that could have run against her when Pelosi said, hey, maybe it should be an open convention. No, it wasn't going to be an open convention or we'd have had chaos and a mess. And so she was amazing at capturing it and bringing the party together. Now, the honeymoon is now down to reality and it's flattened just a hair. And so the polls are tight, razor's edge, both in the presidential race and in the Senate races. I just looked at 538. Michigan, Democrat, +1. Wisconsin, Democrat, +1. Georgia, Republican, +1. North Carolina, Republican, +1. This thing can go either way. My hope, Bankole, and this is what I put out. I did a little interview on London Times Radio, and I said, I think where this goes, and the reason that it may well be that Democrats overperform, the media's been saying Democrats, that it's Trump who overperformed. No, actually, in every election since 2017, the Democrats have done better than expected, and it's been powerful. And the reason this time is going to be shown, I think, by the Nikki Haley voters who, even when she withdrew, she pulled 10 to 15% of Republicans. Those are people that probably won't tell pollsters and won't talk to pollsters. So I think the Democrats may do much better than anticipated, and that may be one of the reasons. I'm hoping that kind of resistance and all, I was at the Democratic convention, helped organize the media. All of the Republicans, from the Republican governor, all the national security people, all of Trump's staff, Dick Cheney, and Liz Cheney, who were used to be strong Trump people, they've all come out saying Trump is an absolute danger. I think that may have some bearing, and I think this could be, and I'm with Jim Clyburn, I think this could be a wave election that surprises everyone. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful.
So you're hopeful that there will be a crossover votes from Republicans crossing over to vote for Vice President Kamala Harris?
And I've never seen a coalition as strong as there is of Republicans. There's no such thing of Democrats for Trump. Those coalitions don't exist, Rachel Maddow pointed out last night. So yes, I am very hopeful about that.
So let's talk about the polls. There's been some what I call some apprehension here with some of the polls that we've seen lately, and I've seen some Democrats kind of very skittish and nervous about the fact that the polls are too tight. Are you surprised that the polls are too tight?
Yes, I don't understand. Excuse me for looking at my notes here,
sure,
but I just don't understand how you can have somebody who says that the people who oppose him are enemies from within, that they're vermin, that they're poison. Flynn says that he's going to have all hell rage against the people that vote against him and organize against him. Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said that Trump is a fascist to the core. Trump refuses to release a health care record, whereas Harris, and that's only in the past week. I mean, let alone they grabbed them by the what that should have gotten every woman in America to vote no, and his position that wants to take away the empowering of women on choice. And his positions on tariffs, which are going to be $4,000 to every American family. This guy is a disaster. And all of the economists and all of the major economic magazines and the experts and the big financial companies saying that Harris is 1/2 of the deficit increase that Trump will be, and that Trump is a disaster, doesn't understand a thing. As he met with the CEOs of Wall Street, they all said he didn't know anything about economics. And he's had all these bankruptcies and fraud convictions in his business. How do you vote for somebody like that? I don't understand it. And I think it boils down, Bankole. Now, let's be candid here. I think Harris is, get this, shock, a woman. And the fact that she is a woman, I don't understand how she can't say, come on, black men, vote for me. I love you. You love me back. How does that not happen? I don't understand that one. And maybe you can explain that to me.
Well, yeah, it goes back to her days as a prosecutor, and I think Democrats or surrogates have been trying to do their best to get that message to black men that Donald Trump, in as much as they may have their own concerns about Harris, that Donald Trump is not the answer. It's almost the same as what we saw here in Michigan in the city of Hamtramck, where you have Hamtramck's first Muslim mayor comes out and support Donald Trump over the war in Gaza. Well, Donald Trump is not the answer.
No.
Even when you look at, no matter where you stand on the Middle East question, Trump is not the answer, because Donald Trump is an agent of chaos. And I think that needs to drive home more. Donald Trump is an agent of chaos, something that I've written about many times in my columns in the Detroit News, and I've spoken about it several times. But what I want to talk about, though, Bob, is that you are a strategist. We have only 3 weeks to go before the election. What do you think the Harris campaign ought to do this next 3 weeks? I mean, she's here in Michigan, I think 3 times this week. She's going to be in Grand Rapids, Oakland County. She's in Detroit today. What do you think the Harris campaign ought to do in the next 3 weeks as it relates to the battleground states?
Well, as Senate Democratic campaign chair told us, yes, the economy is a lagging indicator. And wow, the numbers on the economy, the jobs created, the record jobs, the record low unemployment, the lowered interest rates, the stock market at all-time record highs. And the fact that the World Bank says that the United States is powering the world's economy, and Biden and Harris stopped the recession that all economists said was going to happen post-COVID. They stopped it with the programs and the funding that they infused into the economy. They were a humongous success. And that Black and Hispanic and all men who want jobs and all women who want jobs should understand that the creation of a record jobs number is what Democrats did, what Harris and her team have helped accomplish. The fact that healthcare prices are now lower, and that prescription drugs, $35 insulin, and all the other drugs that are being dragged into the price controls now, the Democrats are helping the programs that everyone cares about, and Trump will block those. And then the other side, they need to do the negative. So they stop the recession. The economy is booming for you and creating jobs for you. You don't want to go back to the guy who was the only president since Herbert Hoover who lost jobs. That's Trump's record. And the fact that there is his businesses, his personal finances, and his national finances as president were a disaster. That's Trump's track record. So they need to point that out and say the choice is clear, and the economy is the reason. In addition to, and yes, they should go negative because it works, and it's true, he's a convicted felon on many fronts and blocked with the piece I had in the Detroit News that you sent me a copy of, the real copy. Delay. Trump's strategy conned the American people into them not knowing some of the facts about all of his convictions and all of his indictments. So that he's blocked the information on his health care, on his indictments. So they've got to be very clear in terms of what the choices are. But I think Harris needs to make a direct appeal, not just have events for things that show that she's been helpful to Black men. She's got to say, Black men, I want your votes. You can help make sure that Donald Trump can lose, and that we can have the country go forward in a positive way. She's got to make that clear and not just beat around the bush. One of the things about Harris is it takes her a while to get to the point.
And you think that that's been a problem, though, right?
Yes, that's part of the reason why, after the initial surge, why she's come down some, is her message has not been delivered with punchlines right at the start of her speeches about what she's saying and why it's important and what the main points are. She really needs coaching on that, and it's a little too late for the coaching, but she's got to do that.
But it's interesting you say that, though, because I see the rationale in terms of just her coming out to make that declaration. I need Black men to stand with me. I need Black men on board. We cannot win this election without you in these urban cities and urban communities.
There you go.
That's something that we've not heard from her yet.
That's exactly right. Be direct and forthcoming. And actually, Trump does that in his speeches. He asks for the votes. He asks them for their votes. He's better at that than she is, except that he has less to work with, and he's got negatives that are incredibly powerful. She doesn't have those negatives, and that's a good thing. So yes, she needs to do that. In every constituent, she needs to ask directly for the votes of the constituents that she needs.
Let me ask you.
I think that would be a corrective action.
Right. Yeah. Let me ask you this question. Why do you think Donald Trump has such a hold on the Republican Party?
Well, we wrote about that. Aside from there being a core of racism and bigotry, I think that what he appeals to is the fear of replacement theory. That's number one. People think that the demographics are the other demographic is going to control our country. There's a fear of that, number one, and he's appealing to that. Number two is choice. He has the support of the people who are pro-life single issue voters, and he has that. And number three, he has the myth that his tax cuts are going to make people richer, when in fact, we've written in many papers across the country, Democrats have a record of 5.5% GDP growth, Republicans 1.5% since Roosevelt under the presidencies. And that's because the Republicans always do tax breaks for the rich, which does not trickle down, and the Republicans do, and the Democrats do people programs and tax breaks for the middle and the lower. And so They've got to get over the myth that they're going to get rich with Donald Trump's rich tax breaks. It doesn't work. And when I lectured at the London School of Economics, and I was there to do the differences between the parties economically and why those differences are, every hand in the room got raised when I said, which is better, tax breaks for the rich as an economic driver or people programs for the poor and tax breaks for middle and lower? Every hand in the room rose on the second option, not the first option, which is what Trump is doing. And people don't understand that. They don't think that it does. They think it trickles down, and it doesn't.
Yeah, no. I think you made the case. It's amazing how we are at this point, and a guy who was defeated in 2020 returns to be the Republican nominee in 2024. But coming back to Vice President Kamala Harris here, and I want to expand this a little bit to the Senate race as well, because it's all tied in together. Senator Gary Peters, the senator from Michigan, soon to be senior senator from Michigan, who's chair of the Senate Democratic Campaign Committee, told us at the National Press Club recently when we hosted him there, you and I hosted him. He basically indicated that the top of the ticket obviously does have the propensity to lift up everybody else on the ticket, including the Senate races around the country. He indicated that the Harris campaign or candidacy has brought excitement for the Senate race. How do you see that going so far?
Well, in Michigan, it says Senate Democratic race plus 4D, so that's a little something that we have under 538 consensus.
According to 538, but is that a sign of hope for you?
Yes, that's a sign of hope. I think that Peters had a point about candidate quality. What I am still concerned about is his strategy is to drive through Cruz and Scott, and I'm looking at the polls, and both those guys are well up. It's a little bit of fool's gold. So if I were going to predict what's going to happen, it's going to be unfortunately the Republicans flip the Senate thanks to Manchin leaving and Tester probably losing. Although I hope I'm wrong, I hope he pulls it off.
Right.
But I think that's probably what's going to happen. And the House actually flips to the Democrats, thank God, because they'll be the certifiers of the election. And Harris sneaks in with a close win, and all the governors aren't going to violate the will of their people, and they will certify the votes, but there will be challenges, and it'll be up to the House. Now, the problem with the House is that the Republicans may take the rule of you go to the state clumps, not to the individual votes of the House members. And I think last I heard that there's a majority of states that are actually Republican. And so we could be in for a huge, big mess. What I think there will not be this time is the Capitol cops aren't stupid, and they're not going to let the barrier be bike racks that you can push over with a toothpick. Right. So this time there will be a barrier around, and there won't be the violence inside. But that's small comfort for what the Republicans are trying to do with people and logistics.
Okay. I want to get your take one more before we round up this interview, Bob, and that is Bob Woodward's book that came out. Did you think that was the October surprise where he talked about Donald Trump sending COVID equipment to Putin in Russia?
What an outrage that he's so Putin. You got to get back.
Kremlin, the Trump campaign denied it, but the Kremlin.
Yeah, let me guess. Take your pick now. Do we believe Trump? Do we believe Woodward? Get serious. So, of course, we're going to... Here, let me turn this off. Okay, boom.
Right.
Of course, Woodward has done his research and has all of the facts and all of the documents to back himself up. So, the fact that Milley said that he's a fascist to the core, the fact that Trump sent the COVID equipment to Putin, the fact that he's been talking to Putin since... the Steele dossier, nobody has undocumented any of it, even the horrible stuff that was in there. So I think, Putin has something over Trump, and Trump has had Putin envy ever since he was young. It's in his own book, 1985. He went over to Russia to meet with Foreign Minister Dobrynin, daughter. And he wanted a Trump Tower, and he never got it. Did he? He never got a Trump Tower in Moscow. So they've been conning him and using him as a useful idiot, and he's had this envy ever since, and he can't give it up.
So you think the Woodward piece was the October surprise?
I don't think it's big enough to be an October surprise.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't think it has that much power.
right.
I think some of the quotes, the Milley quote of a fascist to the core, but you had all the national security advisors already saying Trump was dangerous and reckless,
Yeah,
and had no sense of how to make policy. And you just put Biden against Trump, and Biden knew every person, everything, every subtlety, and Trump knew nothing. I mean, so he just doesn't have what it takes to be president again. I don't understand how good Republicans, come out for him. And I guess the only reason is they're afraid of being primaried. That's
yeah,
all I can come up with. I mean, everybody says they don't understand it. They're afraid of being primaried, and power corrupts absolutely, so they want their power.
yeah.
I hope we vote against that, and I hope that in the secrecy of the ballot box, this is a tidal wave.
All right. Thank you so much, Bob, for being here.
Good pleasure.
All right.
Hip-hop has been a reflection of culture and society.
That includes stories of struggle
and pain,
social injustice,
racial inequality,
the marginalization of communities.
Today,
we confront a healthcare system
that has been rigged against all of us.
Hospitals force patients to sign contracts for services
without ever showing us actual prices,
stifling competition,
overcharging without accountability.
And if we can't pay, these same contracts
allow them to take everything we own,
creating so much fear that millions and millions of Americans refuse to enter our hospital,
putting our health and our lives at stake.
This is an American humanitarian crisis.
We love our nurses,
and we need our doctors,
but hospitals and insurers
rigging a system to make profits off of people that's in struggle is unforgivable.
We demand prices
and transparency in healthcare.
Power
to the patients.
All right, that was my conversation with Robert Weiner, former White House spokesman. Joining me now is, of course, Chicago's own Congressman Jonathan Jackson, who is in Detroit this week on the campaign trail for Vice President Kamala Harris. Congressman, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Bankole. Appreciate your work, and I always enjoy listening to you online, and better to see you in person.
I know. Thanks for being here. I just want to cut to the chase right away. What do you see at stake right now in this last 3 weeks before we get to the vote?
Oh, this is a turning point, a huge decision point, an inflection point in American history. Are we going forwards or backwards? This is after 60 years of mostly continual progress since Fannie Lou Hamer in 1964 going to the Atlantic City Democratic Convention, being sick and tired of being sick and tired, a woman that was fighting for her full emancipation, right to vote, a woman that was also standing for women's reproductive rights. Fannie Lou Hamer, a little known story, is in the county she was in, she had a cyst in her stomach. It was removed. Then she found out days later that she was given a hysterectomy. Then they did further exploration and found out 60% of the Black women in that county had received hysterectomies. So the same people that are against a woman having the right to choose, absolutely mandating the state take over a woman's body, are the same people that think poor women have too many babies. So be careful on the logic. It's not about abortion. It's a broader issue than that. As we talk about this environment, there's not one issue that has been voted upon in these 30 state legislators that affects a man's health or his body and his reproductive choices. So that's the issue there. Going forward, it's the finish line. The next president is going to be able to appoint 2 United States Supreme Court justices. We saw with Mr. Trump in just one term, in less than 1,460 days, appoint 2 Supreme Court justices and overturn 50 years of law in Roe versus Wade. We've seen them take away affirmative action for higher education. There's so much, and that's contract, that's compliance, that's access to selective enrollment schools. And now the same people are the Bloom organization, the Students for Fair Admission, are challenging the Naval and the Military Academy under the guise that they were able to keep affirmative action. So it's a huge issue on, will there be a path for forward progress, or are they going to go back again? Operative word, again. What period in history are they talking about again? This is as great as America has ever been. So I don't want to go back to anything again. I didn't have to sit in the back of a bus. I didn't have to go to a segregated funeral home, segregated graveyard. I got the chance to go to the school of my choice. I want to go forward And that's what attracts me to the message of President Harris.
President Harris.
Let me be the first to say it.
Prophecy? Yeah, exactly. from Prophet Congressman Jonathan Jackson. But in that note, you made the historical chronology from Fannie Lou Hamer. You laid out the case, what is at stake in this election. Let's talk about the African American men, Black men in particular. We've been hearing a lot of noise in the media, assumptions being made that in fact that there are some Black men who are holding out, and there are some who actually may be thinking about voting for Donald Trump. I mean, you are a Black male, Congressman Jackson. How do you address that?
Well, I think some of the hype that people are saying about Black males is you keep saying you have a problem, saying you have a problem, you'll end up creating a problem. There's no Black problem, no Black male deflection issue in the Democratic Party. The most loyal, largest voting bloc for the Democratic Party is African American female. The second most loyal, largest bloc is African American male. The issue is, how do we get more white women to join the right side of history to support Kamala Harris? How do we get more white men in labor to join the right side of history and vote for Kamala Harris? So I don't think it's fair for people to disparage Black men. We've been there, and we've also been hurt by many of the policies. 3 strikes, the truth in sentencing. So we've tolerated the most. It's rather insulting for people to put that burden. Black men have pain like every other group. We see billions of dollars going to countries all around the world, and we look at our same streets, King drives across every country, across every city, every state in America. We don't see the progress that we want. Rents are too high, groceries are too high, employment opportunities are too low. Our access to capital has been restricted. Our access to university has been now eliminated to the highest echelon. So people need to listen to the men that have been most loyal to the Democratic Party, to our base, and support and hear us out. And from the time we go back to the United States Congress and we talk about $100 billion going there and $100 billion going there, we need to bring those programs right back home for economic development. If I can put one other point in there, I remember when I was teaching, I asked a student of mine that was from Germany. She was roughly in her early 20s. I said, I want to go to Germany and I want to see what East Germany looks like. And I started asking her questions about, tell me about East Germany. And it went straight over her head. She didn't understand. She has no reconciliation, no knowledge. She's never heard any mention of East and West Germany. It's Germany. But what happened when that wall came down? They committed then in the 1980s $1 trillion to uplifting their brothers on the eastern side of the wall. Now East and West Germany has now been totally economically integrated, socially, politically, economically, as I said. Why can't we do that in many of our urban cities? What's the disconnect in Detroit between the Southfields and the Bloomfields and the Highland Park and the east side and the west side? What's the disconnect on people in Flint being able to get water, living off one of the Great Lakes? How can they not have fresh water in many of these other cities that were explored? So we need to fix water systems. I'm glad under the leadership of President Joe Biden that the EPA was fully funded to remove all the lead service lines in the nation. Chicago leads the nation with having the most lead service lines. So tremendous things have happened in there. It was the largest investment in human infrastructure in American history. So Black men are on board. Black men need to be heard. And I would say one last point about that. There's every Sunday before the Tuesday election, every politician that's voting Democrat finds their way to the Black church and says, we have to touch the base, touch the base. We've got to get the base out to make sure that we win. But on the Wednesday after the Tuesday election, they go and start applauding the frontliners. We want to thank the frontliners that gave us the majority. Those seats that flip blue to red, red to blue, and stay purple in between. But they don't come back to the base. Why doesn't the president and the vice president in the future come back to the hard-hit parts of our community and say, thank you for having delivered us? No, you're not going to fundraise over here. We don't have those sort of funds. We've had a centuries of theft. No, don't come over here. Thank us for the votes. That's the radical part about being in a democracy. Well, on that day, election day, the richest person and the poorest person are equal. They have the same right to a vote. And let's make sure that we come out.
I know you've been crisscrossing the country and talking to people and getting people out to vote. What are you hearing, though, for those who have been coming out to listen to you speak, about the importance of getting Vice President Kamala Harris to the White House as president?
Well, I think she's doing an incredible job. She has only been running for 8 or 9 weeks, and she's had to run in 50 states. Imagine taking over a Fortune 500 corporation overnight, and you got 8, 10 weeks to move it. So she's done a great job on that. What I'm hearing is the food is a huge issue. Inflation is hurting everyone at the grocery store. And I can personally attest to that. I bought 7, 8 items the other day, and it was $70 and there was no meat. And I'm like, what happened? The transportation costs are too high. The average price of a new car now is $40,000. Student debt is still crippling the Generation Z and the millennials. President Joe Biden has eliminated over $160 billion in student debt, working around and against the United States Supreme Court. So that was amazing. We're also talking about the rents. The rents are too high. And I would tell you, we still have the chronic issues in healthcare. Gun violence should be taken up by the Center for Disease Control. If you had 30,000 people dying of gun violence in the other part, that's a disease, a social, communicable disease that needs mental health. We also have to talk about fentanyl. Fentanyl isn't bloody, but twice as many people are dying now from fentanyl as they are from the gun violence. And we also have to talk about hypertension and some of the ongoing things. The basic access to food. I'm glad that I'm on the Agriculture Committee. You're going to be hearing more from me on initiatives we're going to have about agriculture.
Right. And Congressman, I want to give you just as we round up this interview, just to reflect briefly on your father's legacy. At the recent Democratic National Convention in Chicago, there was a tribute, a standing ovation for your father, the Reverend Jesse Louis Jackson Sr.
Well, I have to say thank you, and I've got a debt of gratitude to so many people. And when I think of a legacy, I think of something that transcends you, that's bigger than yourself, that lives on beyond you. And when I remember a young Barack Obama before he was president, and he was in my living room at my house, and Michelle Obama went to school with my sister in high school, and we had some early childhood experiences there, and they acknowledged the work of my father, Reverend Jackson. And when I know that Vice President Harris was demonstrating for a free South Africa in 1986, she says she was inspired by my father. She came to do his retirement event in Chicago. And I think of a Cleo Fields in Louisiana, and I think of a Mayor Dinkins in New York, and a Doug Wilder. And I think of all these young progressives. Progressives are now the largest bloc, a voting bloc in the Democratic Party. And they pay homage and thank my father. And these are Blacks and whites that believed in multiracial, multi-ethnic society, if you will. As Frederick Douglass described, a composite society. I'm just overwhelmed. And I do believe my father's best days are ahead of him. He's on his way today to Columbus, Ohio. He wants to go through Springfield. He's on the hook talking about Haiti, Haiti, Haiti. If I could leave you with one last thing, Bankole, when Haitians were trying to get in the country, I believe it was 2 years ago now, in August, we saw how they were met with horses and whips. Black men remember that pain. So people need to be honest and say, have we done all that we can to respect, uplift, and deliver for the African-American male vote? Who says I'm standing with African-American males? We stand with everyone else. We don't need another study. We don't have some pathology that's any different from anyone else. Give us the resources, protect our lives, respect us, and we thrive.
Right. Congressman Jonathan Jackson, making it clear on this program that Black Lives Matter. Thank you so much for being here.
Clean place. The meals twice a day are amazing. I couldn't be happier. The guys who are in the facility right now, the Red Cross team, they have been amazing. They have bent over backwards to make sure that we have enough to eat, make sure that we have enough to drink, in any way that they can accommodate us. And that if there's one thing that I can pass on to people, you call the Red Cross. They would take care of you. The American Red Cross does it right.
Welcome back to Bankole's Nation, and thank you so much for staying with us during this broadcast. Many of you perhaps may have already read what former President Donald Trump said last week when he appeared before the Detroit Economic Club. Speaking before the Economic Club, he said the whole nation will be like Detroit if Vice President and the current Democratic nominee Kamala Harris were to be elected President of the United States. Obviously, that insult is not surprising to anybody who has followed Donald Trump and what he represents. But the issue, though, for me is the reaction. It's been a week since Trump made those insulting remarks before the Detroit Economic Club. I've been seeing sporadic comments, condemnations here and there on social media. But what we have seen in Detroit, of course, reflective of the past, the most recent past, is the silence of Detroit's civic leadership. There's been no sort of organized statement coming out from Detroit's civic leadership. I've been seeing comments on social media that people have been sharing with me about the reaction from some about what Donald Trump said. Like I said, I'm not surprised about Donald Trump's comments before the Economic Club. I'm not surprised. Yes, it is true that many of the city's business leaders were perhaps in that room. The Economic Club is a club of captains of industry. They invite Republicans and Democrats to speak to them, libertarians, you name it. But what is missing in this debate is the response from Detroit's civic leadership. Let me qualify it, Detroit's Black civic leadership. They have not said anything. I think Mayor Mike Duggan went on Twitter and said something. Governor Gretchen Whitmer went on Twitter and said something. But there's a distinction between going on Twitter to tweet something out and rolling out a full statement saying this is coming from us, leaders of Detroit, civic leaders of Detroit, and we disapprove of former President Donald Trump's portrayal of the city. That has not happened. Now, I've received a lot of calls from some prominent African-American leaders, from folks in the Black community who have been disappointed that those who normally take the front row when it comes to civic leadership in this town are quiet and silent about this. It's been a week. It's been a week. Now, you can go on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and say whatever you want to say. There's a difference between doing that and standing at a press conference or standing at a forum and making a statement or laying out the case as to why Trump was dead wrong. But what it shows is the deafening silence that we continue to see across the spectrum when it comes to Black civic leadership in Detroit. The deafening silence on the issues that matter. Some of you who have followed my work know I've said this time and time again, that when it comes sometimes to the most important issues, driving the lives of Black folk in the city of Detroit, too many times there's a silence on the part of civic leadership, unwilling to challenge the status quo, unwilling to speak truth to power, unwilling to stand up for what is right. And I can see the reason, I can see the benefit of standing up to issue a counter statement or to say something that's a counterweight to what Donald Trump was trying to establish before the Economic Club. Now, there are some who said that the Economic Club leaders should have said something. There are those who argue that the board of directors of the Economic Club should have said something because some of their investments are in Detroit. That's a reasonable argument. That's a reasonable argument. But given who Trump is and what he represents, I am not surprised. What I'm surprised about is the fact that those who feel that they have much to lose with the negative designation, a negative designation attached to Detroit by Donald Trump, I'm not speaking up. And when you look at that, when you look at the silence of Black civic leadership, it's a pattern. It's a pattern of not speaking out, not speaking to the power on the issues that matter in Detroit. Now, Donald Trump didn't have to come here and insult Detroit to get people riled up. You know, sometimes Donald Trump says certain things because he wants to get a reaction out of people. Now, Donald Trump don't care whether, Detroit civic leadership responds or not. He doesn't care whether the Economic Club responds to what he said or not. Trump is a chaos agent. This is what he's good at. The larger issue is whether Detroit's civic leadership, Detroit's Black leadership, will take this as a lesson to say, okay, we need to speak out on this. Not only speak out on what Trump said and disagree with him, go on the record to disagree with him, but also speak out on other issues. We've had issues in the past in the city of Detroit where Black civic leadership has basically been silent. My phone's been blowing up since Trump came to the Economic Club last week. People are telling me, why is so-and-so not saying something? Why is so-and-so not saying something? Why are they quiet? And my response is, are you surprised? They didn't say a word about $600 million overtaxation of Detroit homeowners. The same folk you're asking to speak out, they didn't speak out on those crucial issues affecting Black lives. So why do you expect them all of a sudden now to come out and speak out on a remark or a negative comment, an insulting comment that Donald Trump made about the city of Detroit? It's one thing to demand the Detroit Economic Club to say something. It's another thing to have a consistent pattern of speaking out, no matter where the chips fall, or speak out, let the chips fall where they may. Speak out on the issues. So I've been reading a lot of comments on social media. It's almost like it's easy to say whatever you want to say on Facebook and garner likes, but those do not create change. You're making a comment on Facebook, you have 300, 400, 200, 100 people liked it and make a comment, great job, thank you. That doesn't mean anything. That does not mean anything. That does not mean anything. People react in a state of emotional frenzy about it. That does not mean anything. Go on the historical record. Do a full throttle press conference. Do a forum, a town hall. And talk about why you disagree with Donald Trump, but not only Donald Trump, but talk about the other issues that are taking place in the city of Detroit that you've looked the other way. Somebody knows what I'm talking about. Somebody who's listening to this podcast knows what Bankole Thompson is saying right now. There have been many issues that have played out in this town where folks have chosen to look the other way because it will inconvenient. It will affect whatever they may have going on with the power structure or the status quo. So I wasn't surprised that it took more than a week for some folk to start saying that they have a problem with what Trump did before the Economic Club, that they had a problem with the Economic Club not saying something. There's a valid argument in there. Like I said, there's a valid argument. There's a very valid argument about the Economic Club and their silence on Trump appearing before them and trashing the city of Detroit, the very city where these business leaders have their investment in. That's a valid argument. But there's also another valid argument. Why did these Black civic leaders not come out the same week that Trump made those disparaging remarks about Detroit? Why did they wait a week after? And cast that aside, there are other issues taking place, unraveling in this town, in Detroit, where some of the folk who are clamoring and saying they're upset. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be upset. We all are upset. We all are equally upset about what Donald Trump said. But what I'm saying is there has to be a consistent pattern of speaking truth to power and speaking on the issues that are affecting Black lives. Donald Trump has a very negative view about Black folk. We know that. That doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise many people. And him saying it before the Economic Club, saying the whole nation will be like Detroit, that doesn't surprise me. Should people be upset? Rightfully so. Should they be angered by it? Rightfully so. Should they be unsettled about it? Rightfully so. But what took so long? And if you're going to express legitimate discontent and outrage, are you going to do it through a comment on Facebook? Or are you going to organize and marshal the collective voices of civic leadership in Detroit to say this is our position, this is what we believe, and this is why we think the Economic Club ought to have said something. This is why we think Donald Trump is dead wrong. And when you do that, we have other issues in Detroit that are playing out every day, 24/7, that you could speak out of. Think about it. Think about what Detroit has gone through. And those are some of the issues we're going to explore on this podcast. Not only what Detroit has gone through, but what Detroit has gone through and how it affects other cities around the nation. So you'll be hearing voices from around the country on this podcast talking to us. Lessons learned, what we could avoid, or what we could have avoided, or what is taking place, or what meaningful revitalization looks like, what economic revitalization looks like. Not what some are telling you it looks like. So whether it's Donald Trump, whoever it is speaking before the Economic Club, their view of Detroit does not change my perspective of Detroit, does not change, hopefully, our perspective of Detroit. As a city that will always rise from the ashes, doesn't change my perspective. Should we display righteous indignation about the fact that Trump had the audacity to come here asking for Black support and yet trashing the city? Yes, we should display a righteous indignation. In so doing, though, we should also apply that same energy and effort to other issues where many of us have been found wanting and many of us have been silent. And we know what Dr. King talked about, silence in itself. Thank you so much for being here and for tuning in to this week's episode of Bankole's Nation. I want to thank our guest earlier on, Robert Weiner, former White House spokesman, for joining us to talk about the 2024 presidential race, as well as Illinois Congressman Jonathan Jackson, the son of Reverend Jesse Jackson, joining us to talk about Black men and the 2024 race. We'll see you with more on Bankole's Nation next week.